Hello, Renegade Thinkers. My guest today is Celia Fleischaker, the CMO of Verint, a company that works with more than 10,000 organizations in over 175 countries, including more than 85% of the Fortune 100 in the customer engagement space. And we'll be spending some time talking about customer engagement, but we're also going to talk about Celia's career and how she sort of navigated into situations where the company hadn't really been broken in, if you will, in the CMO role. So Celia, welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Thanks, Drew. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So how are you?
Doing well, enjoying summer and starting to get back to travel, which is great. So
awesome. Have you been on a plane?
I have been, and it's crowded, which I guess is good, but yeah, it's been nice.
Right? It's absolutely crazy. I mean, I was on a plane a couple of weeks ago and airport was packed. It was like it was a holiday weekend.
Yeah, exactly. People are excited to get back, I think.
So I always like to ground folks who are listening or watching. Where are you?
I am just north of Atlanta. So I'm based in Alpharetta.
Alpharetta, Atlanta. So you are dealing with toasty summer. I learned yesterday that Augusta actually closes for the summer. I had no idea, just because it's sort of too hard on the course.
Yeah, it is warm here. I'll say I moved here from Houston, which was even hotter. So this isn't so bad.
Yeah, there you go. See, nothing like Houston to make a lot of other towns. Apologies to the folks from Houston. Make them all look good. Okay, so let's look back a little bit at your career. Before you spent the last, almost year at Verint, you were at PROS, and before that, you were at Epicor. So let's go back to Epicor, where you spent 17 years, which is a really huge chunk. And just talk for a second about, some of the things that you learned and your progression at Epicor.
Yeah, it was a great time. I would say grew up there professionally, had an opportunity. I was part of a company, a smaller startup that was acquired, came into the organization, really went from being part of a 15-person startup to being a $1 billion organization. And through a series of changes and acquisitions, it was, you got a new experience every couple of years. And from a marketing perspective, what was great was being able to move around marketing. So starting in product marketing, having time in field marketing and corporate marketing, and really getting the experience so that when eventually I became CMO, you had to kind of spend time in the shoes of each of those roles.
And what's so interesting as I listen to it, because in huddles this comes up a lot. The fact that you had product marketing experience is really helpful because that's a really hard role to fill. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that sort of makes a good product marketer and why that's such a good stop along the way?
I think it's a good stop along the way. It's a great place to start. I know whenever I'm mentoring and talking with other people in marketing, I'm always recommending, if you haven't had a stint there, it's so important because that's where you really learn the market and the products and how to speak to the market and to your customers. And I think that serves as a foundation for anything you might go on to do in marketing or in other areas in an organization.
Now, one of the things I've noticed that there are often sort of ex-engineers in that role because you also have to translate product and technology and make it sort of understandable to the target audience. Was that at all part of what you had to do in that role?
Absolutely. I had early in career product management and product marketing, right? So you do tend to spend a lot of time with that R&D side, understanding that piece of it. You see a lot of people in there that experience from us like a solution engineer, a sales engineer, pre-sales role, really good in there because it's the people that are great at understanding here's what it does and here's why it matters. That translation bit is so important.
And the sort of last thing on that role is you really do have a huge impact because if you're the person that's guiding where the product is going, you're getting feedback, you're guiding the marketing, you can have a profound impact on the success of the company.
Absolutely. I do. I think it's such a great place to you learn so much, and if you do it well, like you're saying, and you understand market and you're talking to your customers, that it sets you up to drive a lot of impact.
And it's funny because there's this, it's just this yin yang thing. There are a lot of companies that are sort of almost driven. They call it, they're product marketing driven. And then there's sort of folks that are, we'll just call them demand driven. And if they're demand driven, they want to be product marketing driven, and they're product marketing driven, they want to be other. It's sort of funny how that always seems to be this sort of push pull thing with this. But I think the point of product marketing is they're kind of hoping the product will sell itself.
Yeah, I think it's the product will yeah, it will help sell itself, and I think it just sets you up for success if you position it correctly and align it to what the market needs. Then your demand will be successful.
Okay, so we're going to fast forward. You end up as CMO of Epicor, and at some point, 17 years into this, you decide to go to PROS. What inspired that move?
I think, a couple different things. It was just a good time. We've been through a few iterations as a PE owned company, great owners, but after a couple of changes in ownership, getting over, and I was, as a CMO, very interested in having public company experience. PROS was a public organization. It was an organization who had done a SaaS transformation really well. So it was cloud. It was on that very heavy on AI, and then it was right on that customer side, dealing with how you sell, and it just presented a lot of opportunities to do something, take what I'd learned, but do something new at an organization, and really test things out and have an impact.
It's so funny. You and I talked in the pre-show. I know that, in fact, Paul Stoddard, who's the CMO of Epicor, and Katrina Clear, who is the CMO of PROS, know them both. But it occurs to me that at least with Katrina, that you guys should connect. Yet it's so rare that CMOs from the former CMO will connect with the current one. I'm not quite sure why that is.
I mean that you said that, and I love the idea of it, because there's so much to learn back and forth, right? Not only sharing what I might have learned at the organization, but sharing what she found when she came in. She's like, hey, this would have helped. Because I think one thing as a CMO is shortest tenure in the C-suite, right? We tend to change over for various reasons, and having that opportunity to connect with the successor, I like that. I think that's a great thing for the company and for the new CMO and old CMO.
Well, since both of them are in CMO huddles, we just have to make that happen for you, and then that'll be easy. Anyway, so then at PROS, you make the move to Verint, and let's talk about that. What was it that inspired you to join Verint?
Yeah, I mean, Verint, this was cool because it was coming to an organization that kind of combined the best of both worlds for me. I'd had experience at PROS and at Epicor, and here's Verint that similar in size and scale to Epicor, recently are undergoing a cloud transformation like PROS, and then just the space itself. I love the idea. I think a marketer, you love working with customers and the customer touch points. And this is what Verint does. It drives customer engagement. So being able to bring that to what I'm taking to market was exciting for me.
So as an experienced CMO, sometimes you come into roles where the folks in the organization are not so sure about exactly what a CMO does. And you could be the first or second CMO. Let's talk a little bit about sort of what it takes to break in an organization, and some of the things that you do and what foundations you lay in the first 90 days that sort of get folks sort of aligned with what the role can and should do.
I think That's right, because everyone has a different idea of what marketing brings to the table. And I think you also have different types of CMOs, whether you have a CMO that's very data ops driven, are they strategy message driven, are they demand driven? And one of the first things I've done coming into pros and certainly in Verint is understanding what people's expectations are and what they believe the role of marketing is. And from definitely my peers, understanding that, and from my team too, because sometimes people in role in marketing have a different perspective about what the most important thing is. And so understanding what people's perspectives are on what marketing is going to deliver and then getting alignment there is really critical.
So let's be specific here. If we were looking at pros, what were sort of the expectations, and were they different than when you went to Verint?
Yeah, at pros, it was really important to drive recognition around the company had changed on cloud, but had also really broadened the portfolio. So making sure people understood who we were today in the market and driving the pipeline to support the growth. They were going through really high growth. I mean, everyone has, and so to keep pipeline up with that growth was really important. At Verint, a little bit of a different mandate. I came in, well, one during the pandemic, which is always a different experience, but they were in the midst of a pretty big spinoff of a big chunk of the business. And so they were moving to pure play customer engagement. So getting that spin right was the priority for the first 6-9 months. And that's really where the focus was.
Right. So Verint was other things. And so this company spins out, takes the name, and has this new sort of dedicated CX. Which is interesting. So it's almost at that moment you're kind of building a brand from scratch, or certainly.
Yeah.
Go
You're
ahead.
right. Redefining the brand because you're about 1.3 billion. You're going to spin off 500 million that was cybersecurity, and the remaining company still under the Verint brand is really focused on customer. And so you have to. I think it's almost harder in building a brand that's tough. Changing people's perception of a brand that's been around for 20 plus years is not always easy. And so that was really the focus, getting people to know who we were post-spin and as a customer engagement company was really critical.
And doing that during a pandemic.
Yeah. Always a bonus, yeah.
So was it, and this is interesting because that you used the word mandate. I love that term. What specifically did the CEO say to you what success looks like?
Yeah, success was getting the message defined, step one, right? Understanding who we were as an organization for employees, but also for the market. And I thought it was really nice that there was a big emphasis from him put on an employee understanding and starting inside and making sure people realized who we were going forward, defining what we stood for and what we believed. And then at the same time for investors, for analysts and customers, making sure they did as well. And so the focus really was on the message and how we defined our go-to-market.
And I love that. And any longtime listeners know that this is what I preach on the show and in my upcoming book. And it's so wonderful to hear that it started with the CEO. So again, your customers are your first target. I mean, your employees are your first target audience when you are thinking about rebranding, because if they don't buy in, you got nothing, And it's so refreshing to hear that your CEO recognized that. And then number two, to say your customers are, in fact, your second target. Because if they don't buy into this transition, again, what do you have? You have no testimonials, you have no customer advisory board, you have very little to sell against. So perfect place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into this. So how do we do these things? And what did you do specifically? So stay with us. Okay, we're back. And we've been talking about you're the new CMO. You're helping reposition, if you will, or reestablish what a company does. We're talking about first to employees and second to customers. So let's talk specifically about the process you went through and where you ended up with defining the messaging and particularly to the employees.
So we and again, I came in the middle of this. There's a big team of people that worked on this together, and there was a lot of research went into how we defined it, because it was important that it be credible to our employees and that they really bought in. And so there we had identified, the team had identified a handful of, I'll say, influencers in the organization, people that really knew the organization, a mix of people that had been there a while in different functions, some that were newer to the org. And they were used kind of as touch points along the way, gathering up front in the early process what they saw as our differentiators and how we could go to market. And then as that messaging got developed and the visualizations that went with it, going back and testing against them. And then there were a series of meetings throughout this to brief and get feedback from not just the employees. It started with employees, but customers. You have mentioned, having case studies, having them talk, and it was really interesting. We had briefed some customers and then had recorded some videos with them, asking them about these different pieces of customer engagement. And they were using our terminology. And that's when you feel like you've kind of hit it, right? When your customers, your employees start talking back to you about their experience and the value they're getting, and they're actually using, boundless customer engagement, or, how the future of work, and talking in our language, which is exciting.
So one thing that's interesting in all the episodes of all the shows, never heard a CMO talking about having this super employee group, which is such a good idea, because so often you go out to all the employees through a company-wide survey, and then you have sort of an executive team that is in there sort of as the guidance. But having this middle group of sort of super employers, super employees, super influencers is really smart, and getting them involved and making them, because they're going to be the ones that'll turn around, right, and teach everybody else about
Your ambassadors, this. Right?
Yeah. So really smart idea. So let's talk about what. Yeah. So you had these various ideas. You narrowed it down. Use the term boundless customer experience. Is that the language that you ended up with?
Our top line message was around this idea of boundless customer engagement. When you and we identified a problem that went with it that we were solving, and did primary research around it. We call it engagement capacity gap, but really relating it to the struggles that companies are facing as they're looking at, especially with the pandemic, how they effectively engage with customers. They saw, digital went through the roof and all these interactions. And at the same time, they're, limited on budget and resources. And there's this pull, this tug of how they effectively engage with what they have. And there's a gap typically.
And so engagement capacity gap, and that, so you named the problem.
Yeah, we named the problem.
And you were able to quantify this problem through primary research.
Yeah, so we went out globally to a large group of people in our target markets, asking them about what are they seeing, are they facing challenges here? What are those challenges? How prepared do they feel? And this we did, in the back half of last year. So you're 6 months into the pandemic, and it was interesting. Most people came back and said, yeah, it's challenging. We do see this gap. And by the way, we think it's going to get even bigger and more challenging in the next year, which we didn't necessarily expect. We thought coming out of the pandemic, people would think it was going to get a lot easier. And that wasn't the feeling.
Oh, that's interesting. Why not? Why did they think it wouldn't go away?
I think because of the changes the pandemic kind of pushed in with the acceleration of digital and how much people that had maybe initially it was a necessity during the pandemic, but really became a preference for a large amount of consumers. And getting the tools, the infrastructure, the pieces in place so you can effectively engage through the new channels and an increasing number of channels is tough. And they need help.
So the notion that when things get back to normal is really, there's a new normal and this is what it is. And it's heavily digital and there's no going back.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's so important. There were several things that in this part of the conversation that I just hope, the folks that are listening, I'm going to put a punctuation point on it. Lots of research, customer research, naming the problem in such a way that you are the company that solved it. That is, part of the playbook, but it's a really good one. And what I like about the way you named it is, oh, I get it. I can sort of see the problem right there. Engagement capacity gap. Yeah, okay. So then from there, I'm just riffing here, but I'm sure you could create a tool that measures it. So you could go to the website and you could measure what your engagement capacity gap is. And you could put, and then start having all sorts of cool things. Well, we could brainstorm right now on what to do
There
with
you
that.
go. Help me out.
So cool. So, all right, we have this research. We have this positioning of boundless customer engagement. Let's talk about how you got the word out.
I think a couple different ways. I think for us, it was, we did previews with employees and at an employee meeting, we were made a conscious decision. We've talked about the importance of employees here, but we rolled it out internally first. So they saw it before the market saw it, before anyone else saw it, and really, kind of a sneak peek at, hey, you're going to see this in the market. This is how we're going to roll things out. We're going to be talking about this with our content, but you get it first and we want you to understand it. So that was a big piece of it. And then, we rolled it out with our different constituencies, with analysts, with investors, and then with customers, we rolled it out, I would say, over, it's still going on, right? But we did have our customer conference in May, and we're really able to push at that with our customers, which was great.
So when thinking about this rollout, what went sort of according to expectation? Were there any surprises in the rolling out in terms of the feedback you got or anything there?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One was, it never goes 100% as planned. And we always hear from people about what we could have done better. And so I think going back, I would have put maybe a little more emphasis in a few places and in really pushing, I'd say, the ambassador side of it more, so that we weren't using that push. Has to be more than marketing, right? It needs to come from every area of the org. One of the things that went really well was we did have really good uptake from the leadership team, which was really nice to see. So that, all of a sudden I've got, my CEO, the president, like they're all talking and about Boundless customer engagement when they're on their quarterly meeting. And so those pieces went well. So we also found, and I think this is important, you button it all up, you're packaged and ready to go. We found a couple small pieces we needed to tweak after we rolled it out, and we did. We had some flexibility there. You don't want to go back and revisit everything, but recognizing that it's not always perfect, and you might have some changes to make, and we did make a few adjustments after the fact.
Yeah, one of the things that some research that we did for the book that we found a gap is most CMOs believe that the internal audience is really important, but most CMOs allow less than like 2 weeks for the internal rollout. And, if you're talking about, as you were describing, having your ambassadors, getting them on board and then having them communicate beyond that, sort of a train the trainer kind of program, that takes weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the things that's interesting to me is often with these, I'll call it a rebrand or a reposition, there's something newsworthy here. There's something new for the company, and therefore there may be training required. It's not just words, right? There's actions that back up this thing. And so as a company that's talking about boundless customer engagement, I'm imagining that you had to sort of look internally and say, how are we doing on boundless customer engagement?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. And we did not formalized training, but we did push things out. And then we have a communities platform that we used and gamification to get employees involved in providing feedback all along the way, but also, sharing their of how exactly what you said. Tell us how you're with your customers. Tell us how you're engaging with them and how that relates to what we're providing.
Cool. Okay, so we have to drink our own champagne here when we're talking about things like customer engagement. All right, we're going to take a break. Lots more questions for you. Stay with us. If you don't mind, I'd like to plug CMO Huddles for a second. Launched in 2020, CMO Huddles is an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment, while another called it a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. If you're a B2B CMO that can share and care with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com or send me an email to see if you qualify for a guest pass. Okay, so coming back to this, I want to make sure as we break it down, we've talked about, we found our positioning, we found the language, we roll it out. What were some of the sort of talk a little bit more about the go-to-market of this campaign and what sort of things you did that worked particularly well?
There was a lot of focus on, and not surprisingly, content, and using it as an opportunity to really solidify the content strategy and how we go to market, because we knew we needed a lot of new content that would get used in the global campaign. And so the primary research that we talked about earlier served as a foundation for a lot of that content. And then we also worked with a number of influencers and analysts to create content as well. So how are we going to talk about customer engagement? What do they think the pieces are? So developing, whether it was ebooks, infographics, research and studies, we did a lot of that. And then that really fed the global campaign, which was newer for Verint, but across all the regions, really coming out strong globally with a campaign speaking to a lot of the new messaging.
And when we say campaign, what are we specifically talking about?
We went across a lot. So we are not a company, and I think a lot of companies can identify, that has a ton of budget from a pure advertising standpoint. So this campaign was designed to fill the pipeline and to engage prospects and our customers with our portfolio and matching up what challenges they were having with customer engagement with what we could deliver. And it went across certainly digital channels, email, social, the website, all the different pieces you'd expect in a campaign. And then we were careful to, and there's some tweaking by region as well for the regional differences.
So this is interesting. You have all this fabulous content.
Mm-hmm.
You have somewhat of an awareness issue, mm-hmm. because we know you as various things. How do you, so when you say digital, I'm assuming we're talking about some form of digital advertising, whether it's programmatic or ABM or something. There's some spend somewhere.
Absolutely.
And because if you don't have reach, you can't, get the funnel started. So unless you're just doing targeted accounts and ABM. So, which did you do to help drive, you have all this fabulous content. It right. isn't all going to get, score in the front page of Google search terms.
Yeah, so that content was used in a couple different ways. We did do some at an account level and very targeted spend through some social channels, through digital channels. There was also, I'd say, broader reach from a social perspective and just getting out there in front. There's a lot we had to do with respect to, you talked about the first page, but SEO, just making sure that for those customer engagement terms, for everything that we were working on, how do we rank and make sure we're top of mind?
Okay, so let's get to sort of results and I don't know what you can share with us, but how, from a metric standpoint, what were the key metrics for you?
So, and there are some that I'll say I want to go back and things I would do differently. But in terms of key metrics, we looked at what we've added to the pipeline and looked at it quarter over quarter, year over year from an influence perspective. We saw engagement on our social channels and how that how that was impacted. And we looked at overall some of your basic web. We saw a huge lift in our web traffic and people coming to the site. And so we did look at a lot. And for me, I mean, the one that tends to get the most notice is how much pipeline are we developing? What's coming through the marketing funnel? What's dipping into the pipeline and really making an impact? And that's where I think, especially outside marketing, you tend to get the most interest. Yeah.
So, and let's just make sure we're clear on language, because in huddles,
Okay.
we talked a lot of pipeline definitions vary by company. So when you say marketing influence pipeline, are we talking about sales saying, yes, this is a real legitimate lead, at that kind of pipeline? Or are we talking about marketing qualified leads? What does pipeline mean to you and your organization?
We're looking at both of what you talked about, so that top of funnel. But what I was talking about when I say marketing influence pipeline, sales is qualified. It is in the pipeline. They are working the deal,
Mm-hmm.
and that to me has is so important, because I think that's I care about top of funnel, but most people outside marketing really care about pipeline.
Right. And so that means that they've done a demo. It's been agreed upon that this is a real business opportunity. There's at least one contact, if not more, in the system. And sales is getting meetings.
Exactly. They are talking with that prospect, moving it along. We've got resources against it.
Right. Okay. So just to be clear, that's what pipeline is. And I think that's fairly consistent across companies. And in fact, we had a huddle the other day where the conversation was about, we're just going to stop looking at MQLs because they're stupid and they emphasize the wrong thing no matter what. And it is sort of, because you can't stop there. And even SQLs to some extent are useless, but pipeline, where there is, and of course there are always issues with pipeline. And what is pipeline? And I ask that because it's this thing called multi-streaming, where you need 5 contexts in an organization before it really is an opportunity. But that's a nuance. Okay, so and you were saying, by the way, before we talked, that you wish that there were some other metrics, or what?
Yeah, you know what we didn't do, and in looking back, I would do it. We're planning to do it at the end of the year, but a brand study. And I think getting that baseline on brand, when we were looking at repositioning, was really important. And I think in hindsight, mistake, right, on my part, I should have pushed for that. So we had that baseline. So going a year in, we'd be able to say, boom, we moved the needle here, here, and here.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. So we've been doing a lot of market research studies like the one you're describing for some of our clients at Renegade. And one of the things that we always add now is an aided and unaided category awareness question, because why not? You're doing the research anyway. You're talking to prospects and customers, and assuming your list is representative of your target. Why not do that? And it's easy to add. And in most cases, if you're fielding the research, adding 2 questions like that is easy. Got it. That makes sense. So how, to the extent that you can talk about it, you've mentioned that website traffic got a huge lift. How has the campaign performed?
Yeah, we just had a meeting on that the other day, kind of doing a retrospective. It's gone well. I think for us as a company, just running that global campaign and getting that experience as a team, it was a newer experience for the organization. But we saw a lot of good top of funnel activity, and then we saw a lot of influence in pipes. So we were pleased with it. There, it could always be stronger, better, but it was a good experience.
You had success with this program. You drove a certain percentage of pipeline into the organization. Pipeline is gold. That's the number that the organization can work from. And is there a conversation to be had? And how does that conversation go with a CFO to say, you know what, we spent this amount of money, it achieved this amount of, if we doubled, can we work on a formula so to show that we could drive this up? Because you mentioned that you didn't have a big budget, but you're big. You got a lot of, the value per customer is pretty darn high. So talk a little bit about how you could go about and what it would take to get more money.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like modeling it based on return is so important. And you said, magic, the CFO, that's where you've got to take it, right? Is how am I going to impact bottom line? And I think where we will get to that point. And I think right now, I've been in here 9-10 months. And the measurement, we're getting there so that we're really getting a good baseline and seeing impact of certain programs. I think there's a little bit more we need to do to where I'd feel comfortable. Right now, I could do it based on, okay, past history. When I've done this, here's what we've added from a company perspective or in a past role. But getting to that point where you can model, if you spend this much, or if we do this much, here's the increase in efficiency we're going to get. So I'm going to see that cost for qualified lead go down by this amount with these programs. And I'm going to see this level of impact and lift on 2 levels, the pipeline in general, but also for us, a good measure is looking at the expansion opportunity as well, because we've got a pretty wide portfolio.
Right. And we haven't really talked about what retention and upsell and cross-sell could mean to your organization, but given how many customers you have, that sounds like that would be a big opportunity.
Exactly.
So while we're talking about that, and before we wrap up, is how, as you're do you look at customer campaigns, upsell, cross-sell as sort of a different activity and a different stream of activities? And does that fall even into marketing?
Yeah. I mean, with customer success, it's definitely part of the remit, right? So we definitely have to do that. You're very much, especially in a SaaS world, partnered up with customer success and different parts of the organization. But retention is so important, expansion so important. So we are looking at that, looking at expanding what we do there, because it's really the critical piece, especially when you look at, as you said, you've got 10,000 customers. That's a lot of opportunity. You want to take care of those customers, and then you want to continue to grow that relationship.
All right. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We started with some research. We got our employees very heavily involved. We had this sort of SWAT team of super ambassadors to help sort of test it and evolve the messaging. We rolled out that messaging to employees, then to customers and analysts, and then finally on a global level. We made sure that we had metrics in place. We knew what those were. Pipeline is a metric that almost every organization will embrace, but it would have been nice if we could have had some brand awareness baseline. Always a good thing to do. So, all right. And now that then, beyond that, there is thinking about customer success. What is on the horizon for you? the end of 2021 and 2022 in terms of new things that you think you're going to be considering or want to do to fill the gaps?
For us, the focus is on the digital piece. So we're in the process of rebuilding, redesigning the entire digital. So the website, we've brought on, a new SEO agency, because that piece I think is the foundation for the future. And we spent a lot of time in that first 6 months really getting the messaging right. But digital has to be there, and we've made improvements, but we need a bigger leap there.
Right. Okay. All right. So as you think about the process that you've gone through, and in some sense helping to break in the organization to the role of CMO, give us 2 do's and a don't for other CMOs who end up having to sort of, if you will, break in their organization to having a CMO. 2 do's and a don't.
I think on the 2 do's, one would be listening. You typically, I think most CMOs are planners. You come in with your initial plan, and so making sure that you're to your team that you're coming in to manage, to your peers, to your customers, and things like that. And then being open to change, because I think perceptions during the hiring process versus when you get in the seat, it's change. You learn so much more, and especially in those first few weeks and months.
Okay.
And then on a
Yes.
don't, I don't. I think it's around that, and I think the change piece. They don't get, just because you had a successful playbook in the last company or role. Every role is different, and I think being willing to go in there and not throw out the playbook that you may have had starting out, but really don't get stuck with it. Adjust and learn, because I think marketing itself, every company is so different. You've got to, it's custom build a lot of times.
Yeah, I love that. So we got to listen, we got to be open to change, and we have to be adaptable as we move forward. All right. Well, this has been terrific, Celia. Thank you so much for sharing your journey at Verint.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me. This was great.
And to the listeners, as always, first request, if you enjoyed the episode, go to your favorite podcast channel and give us a 5-star rating and recommend it to a friend. We appreciate that. Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the Amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, or learn more about the savviest B2B marketing boutique in New York City, visit renegade.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.